Today we're ranking every single game never released by Landfall Games, starting off with Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, the 2017 version. Now this is an earlier version of the officially released tabs from 2019, where you're using different units from caveman looking funny dudes to spellcasters to people with RPGs and trebuchets, and you basically pit them to fight each other in a wonky physics-based game. Now the game has a campaign mode where you get to fight different enemies through different eras, and it also has a very unique character creation tool where you can actually make some pretty disturbing characters. But just like the officially released tabs, the best part of the game is actually getting into the sandbox mode where you can make some of the craziest fights imaginable and see how badly you can break the game. And tabs 2017 uses an earlier version of the physics system, so some things probably don't work as intended, but that kind of just adds to the charm and the nonsense because the game's really just about chaotic nonsense, which is why it gets a solid S tier from me. So now let's talk about Physics Fighter, because any game that has physics in its name's gotta be funny, right? And well, in this one you go against different enemies by punching them, kicking them, or just throwing knives, and I gotta say, this one's an easy A tier. This one's actually pretty fun, because every hit feels satisfying thanks to LOL funny physics engine, but you go against fighting different types of enemies every round, and each enemy has its own attack pattern and ability, which makes it fun to figure out how to deal with each level, because you gotta be aware of all the different attack patterns that are coming at you. But unfortunately, the one thing I will say about this game is that it's very short-lived, because I do wish it was longer, but you know, it is an unreleased version, and while there's nothing really groundbreaking or magical about Physics Fighter, it's still a very fun game to play, and it's just as fun to experience as the next game that we're going to talk about, which is Walking House Game. Now this game just screams Howl's Moving Castle if you've ever seen that movie, and it's considered a prototype building game where you control your character while also controlling a giant walking house. And so there's no real objective in the game, but you as a player, you get to build and upgrade your house, you get to build pathways to gather resources, and fight whatever creepy monster from your straight up nightmares just happen to spawn into the game. Overall, the concept of the game is very interesting. I really wish I would develop this more, because just the idea of having to control two things at the same time in this sort of environment just really feels really fun. But just make sure you don't walk your house out of bounds, because that's when the game starts breaking down. And while there's no real story or objective in the unreleased version that we got, it's still a 10 out of 10 concept, and it's a very well-deserved spot in A tier. Next up is Anything for My Pals, and I will warn you, this game is kinda creepy. Imagine you're playing Pikmin, but it's like nightmare-inducing. You control a group of pals by typing out voice commands to go through some obstacles, and if you run out of pals, then you lose the game, but just like the way they stand there and they whisper amongst themselves and they look at you, just unsettling. So you can give them a lot of commands like to follow you or to open doors just to get through all the obstacles. And there's even a kill command that was added to the game, which I couldn't really figure out what to do with it because, well, maybe it's just part of the unfinished game. Maybe they were supposed to add some enemies that you could actually go against, but it would have been cool to see your pals just fighting against other monsters just like in Pikmin. And even though the game seems like it's missing content, well, it's on this list for a reason. It's a bunch of unfinished games, but just like the visuals, the aesthetic, and everything about this game is just beautiful. It's actually just nice to look at. So Anything for My Pals experience overall, S tier. It had me freaked out a lot of the times, but it's an easy S tier for me. Now, speaking of games that had me freaked out or just overall disturbed, was a Blob game. I'd like to see who exactly was the one behind making this game, because you start off locked in a room as part of an experiment, and you're locked in with the ugliest looking blob thing I've ever seen. And if his appearance wasn't unsettling enough, just the way he looks at you, the way he whispers and groans about how good you look. So what the game is trying to get you to do is that you have a bunch of cubes that the blob gives you, and you have to throw them down in a hole, and you have 3 minutes to decide what exactly you're going to do, because do you trust the blob? Do you trust the people in the intercom? Are you going to throw the cubes down the hole? Are you going to feed the cubes to the blob? Are you just going to wait the time out and see what happens? The game has multiple endings, and spoiler alert, none of the endings are actually good for you. But Blob game, as unsettling and as disturbing as it is, I still gotta give it an S tier, because it is a fully fleshed out experience that even though I was like deeply disturbed while I was playing it, I was still very distracted by it. I was entertained by it. Me being a fan of card games, I really enjoyed RTS card game because it's a real-time strategy, that's in the name, card game where you get to summon a bunch of different units like sword users or tanks or like spellcasters, and you can cast abilities using cards to go against different waves of enemies. The cool thing about the game is that you can customize your deck, and you can actually combine cards to make even stronger cards, and as you level up, you're able to summon more units and take them with you to the battlefield. And even though the game feels mechanically fun, even though it's fun to play, the visuals are kind of lacking. It looks like they focus so much on the strategy part of the game and not so much on the visual quality. And if you're into deck builders or RTS kind of games, this game's gonna be like an easy S tier for you. But if you're into like a FIFA or like Call of Duty or something, you might not be able to like it as much. I still consider it a high A tier for you, but for me, I'm gonna put it in S tier because I just genuinely enjoyed the game. Post-game is in a weird spot because it's so different from every other game that we've talked about so far, but it's a building game where you get to build conveyor belts and to move packages into the delivery spots, so it's like working for USPS, sort of. And I know that that concept sounds dumb, it sounds easy, but it's just kind of like those idle games where you kind of just like let the game play itself and you're slowly upgrading it here and there to like be able to deliver more packages and just expand your conveyor belt. But basically, the more packages you deliver, the more gold that you get, and the more gold you get, the more conveyor belts you can afford, and the more conveyor belts you can afford, the more packages that you can deliver. I know it sounds stupid, but trust me, it's actually really entertaining. So it's just like oddly satisfying to watch me deliver more and more packages. So I'm gonna put post-game in the bottom of A tier, and if you don't think it belongs there, then I encourage you, go try it yourself, go play it. Also, I guess I should mention, if you want to play any of these games for yourself, just look up Landfall Archives on Steam. And basically, you'll be dropped off by a helicopter into the middle of nowhere. There's a giant vault, you walk all the way to the end of the vault, and there's a bunch of video games just lying there on the floor. You just put them on the little computer, press play, and you get to play them for yourself. Now the quality of the games is about to drastically change. Airships 1 and 2, the whole concept of the game is that you can actually build your own airships using different parts, but the problem is that you have to actually be smart and actually get the parts to match and make the whole thing functional. This is a game that's probably perfect for engineers, but me, biology major, I don't know how to work this stuff. I spent about 20 minutes trying to get something to fly. I could never actually get anything off the ground, so yeah, maybe I'm too stupid for Airships 1 and 2. It's a B tier. Rectangles is the next game we're going to talk about, and if you already know what Worms Armageddon is, then you know what Rectangles is about, right? You take turns and you have to fight each other by either jumping and then shooting missiles at each other. It's a pretty understandable copy-paste concept, right? Rectangles, C tier. Next up, we have Missile Game, and Missile Game, the concept is you're Angry Birds, right? Your job is to just be launched because you're a missile and then just make your way to the target by maneuvering the missile. Pretty easy to understand if you played Angry Birds and you know what I'm talking about. Another C tier. Robots Forever, Creepy Robots, and Robots Forever 2. I'm putting all of these in the same category. Basically, you just spawn into the map, a very small map by the way. You have a weapon and you have to shoot out all the robots that are trying to chase you. Robots Forever 2, it's a little bit more, complex because there's different levels and different robots that try to come at you, but at the end of the day, it's all the same concept. And if I have to put all those 3 games together in a tier list, then I'm just gonna put them in C tier because there's nothing really memorable about them, there's nothing really magical, it's just shooting robots. Next up, we have Plant Plane, and as simple as the game sounds, it's actually very peaceful. You just have to make your way through the course, and as you pass by, you leave a trail of like forestry and greenery and beautiful green stuff behind. So it's like you're reforesting the world, but you're not really doing that because it's a fake video game. But it's a solid B tier video game. The other plane game on this tier list is Ocean Game, and you're basically a plane flying over the ocean, and there's a bunch of airships that you have to take out. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, it's just like when the Fire Nation's invading and you have to take down the Fire Nation warships. So basically, same concept. And if I have to put it anywhere, I guess I'll put it in C tier. Next up, we have Physics Survival, another physics-based game, and this one I wish I could give it higher than B tier, but it was just really an overall complicated game to figure out, and well, basically, it's a top-down survival game where you have to control your units and send them on hunting expeditions to get food and gather resources to upgrade your equipment or just get more units, and you basically have to survive against, the other incoming units that are trying to get you, or just, like, overall exist. It's survival, so you just have to exist, and again, like, I'm only giving it a B tier. I wish I could play it more and give it an A tier, but for now, B tier's fine. Next up, we're going to talk about Rounds, but not the officially released Rounds game that they have. This is a 3D prototype version with online PvP that you can test out with your friends or whatever strangers you can find, but spoiler alert, you're not going to find anybody because no one's actually playing the game. But Rounds 3D is meant to be a prototype of what Rounds could be, and it mainly just focuses on testing out the shooting mechanics and how the movement feels. So if you have the grace to get into the game and find someone to play with, cool, and if you don't have anybody, then you'll probably just end up putting the game on C tier, so that's what I'm going to do. Now I will say that Counts and Stakes, Playful, Auction Brawl, and Medieval America, if you don't have anybody to play them with, then you're most likely not going to be able to get into the game or even do anything relevant in the game. So I didn't really get the chance to play these games and enjoy them, so I can't really give them a proper rating, but basically Counts and Stakes is a top-down style shooter game where you basically fight against other players in a small arena and there's a bunch of obstacles that you can interact with. Playful is basically a sandbox, so you can make custom games in 1v1 scenarios, and you can play against other players using your own rules and whatever you want to put in the game. Medieval America, I was hoping to to get a game because the name just sounds really fun, but basically it's a physics-based shooter game. You have a jetpack and everything is destructible in the map, and you have to just take out your enemies. And Auction Brawl, even though I said it was online PvP, it's actually local split screen, my bad. And the whole concept of the game is that you're at an auction house and you have to bid for items, and after you win the item, well, guess what? You get to take the item with you to start fighting against your opponents, and see who's the last one standing at the end. And those games, like I mentioned, I can't really give them a good rating because I didn't get the chance to play them properly, but they're online PvP games. Mine is a local split screen game, and just assume that they're good, you know? I just assume they're between C and B tier. Sure, let's go with that. And finally, you have Can You Physics Everything, and this is the biggest troll in the game, because it's not really a game, it's just basically a presentation. Like, I was playing through it and I was like, okay, when does the game start? But no, it's really just a presentation about how Landfall Games works with physics and how physics works in their whole environment. And I guess if you're into the nerdy side of game development, you could find it interesting. But for me, it was like, oh, okay, wow, I got tricked into learning. No thank you. I'll just put it in C tier. And basically, that's the entire tier list. Let me know what you guys think, comment down below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.